Welcome to Job Sharing and Beyond, the Future of Work podcast that goes beyond the traditional 9 to 5. I am Karin Tischler, speaker, consultant, and host of the show, where we hear from global experts every other week to discover innovative solutions and tips on how to remain a relevant employer in the future. Hello, everybody. Ian Dinwiddy was my guest on the LinkedIn Live Conversation show today. Ian is a dad advocate in the UK and the founder of Inspiring Dads. He was a podcast guest on the show about a year ago. We followed up today to talk about a multitude of different topics, from flexible work, transferable skills from unpaid care work, Ian's own podcast, Lockdown Dads, together with James Millar, to why men's work-life balance matters for everyone. Hello, Ian.
Hi, Karin. How are you?
Very good. It is so nice to see you again after nearly a year since we've talked on the podcast Job Sharing and Beyond. So welcome to LinkedIn Live Conversations.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me. It's actually my first LinkedIn Live, and I've been eagerly pressing the button there, requesting my own access to LinkedIn Live, but so far no go on that one. So yeah, thank you for inviting me back on.
You're very welcome. And yes, in my case as well, it took a few times, so one just needs to reapply. Basically, that's what I've learned. Now, for people who don't know you yet, I love to have my guests introduce themselves in the working out loud method by basically sharing 5 facts about themselves. If you could do this, please.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I guess fact number one relevant for today is I'm the founder of a business called Inspiring Dads. We help stressed dads to balance work and fatherhood. I've got 2 children. I've got an 11-year-old and 8-year-old. My 11-year-old's just started secondary school, which has been quite an eye-opener in terms of managing kids in different places and just the sheer complexity of moving up from primary school. So that's been really interesting. I was a National League hockey umpire, field hockey umpire in England, and I'm hopefully to go back to that. And I think the 5th fact, which is a bit of a quirky one, is hockey related as well, is that when I was at university, I played hockey for 3 years with half of Coldplay.
Wow. That is pretty awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And I would also like to welcome everybody who is watching us live right now and anybody who is able to catch us afterwards in the replay. So if you have any particular question you would like to ask Ian, please put it into the comments. And now I would like to learn some more. Since we've talked, we've been speaking about, normalizing flexible work. And what's been so interesting, I feel, is now when flexible work is being talked about, there is hybrid, there is remote. And so I'm trying to just sort of gauge from you, what have you been experiencing talking to people, talking to your client about, how people basically look at flexible work nowadays?
I think it's been really interesting for dads over the last 18 months, outside of the challenges of challenges of COVID and all being under one roof, and obviously different people's experiences can be really, can be profoundly different depending on how easy is it to work from home, what kind of support structures do you have, are you a couple who are both trying to work? All those things have, are factors that make things particularly complicated and can make things really complicated. But I think throughout that, the overriding feeling that I get from dads and the way that dads talk about their experience is that they're really grateful to have connected with their children in a way that they realize and are quite really aware of that 18 months before just wasn't possible. It wasn't seen as doable. I mean, a great example from a client I'm working with at the moment, where he works in a regulated industry. He works within banking. And historically, there was absolutely no way that you could do that job from home. It wasn't safe, it wasn't secure. However, obviously, that job has been done successfully from home for the entire period of the pandemic. And now coming out of that, everyone in that team, small team, they're all going to work from, they're going to be in the office 4 days a week, but they've fundamentally changed. So 1 day a week, they're going to be from home. Exactly how that will work for the team is up for grabs a little bit, but fundamentally it has changed what's seen as possible. And I think it's opened men's eyes, dads' eyes in particular, as to there shouldn't have to be a trade-off between being a great dad and having a great career. You shouldn't have to sacrifice one for the other. And actually, men in some ways are facing the challenge that women have faced for an entire generation of how to balance both and not wanting to feel guilty or not wanting to take shortcuts and to be good at everything. Whereas perhaps historically men have only needed to focus on the work side of things, and now they realize actually there's a whole other world that they really want to be part of, and that's the family life.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I think what is so interesting as well is, as you're describing the home life, the whole COVID experience has really shown that what previously might have been invisible work has become very apparent, that care work indeed is real work. But also that there are, transferable skills that can be learned from care work. And now you have spoken on your podcast, The Lockdown Dads, together with James Millar, with many different guests. And one guest, for example, spoke about returning back from being a stay-at-home dad. And so I'm curious if you could share a little bit more about your experience and all the guests you have had.
Yeah. Well, we did 46 episodes, James and I, of Lockdown Dads podcast, and split into sort of roughly four seasons. And we had a real eclectic mix of people. We talked to a couple of comedians early on, Philip Simons and Ian Dinwiddy, and that was really powerful because their entire livelihoods had collapsed overnight, and it just wasn't possible to be a comedian the way that it had been. So there's some quite powerful kind of conversations about men who are really struggling to earn a living in some ways. We had a couple of MPs, one ex-MP, one current sort of MP. They both brought their kids into the fray, which is quite interesting. Because that was something that not everyone did, but actually the MPs are quite used to bringing in and humanizing themselves, I guess, in some ways. So that was really interesting. We talked about, there's a lady called Olga Fitzroy. We talked about the equal parental pay equality campaign in the UK, which is based on the fact that while a man employed in a business working for someone is entitled to a minimum of 2 weeks of paternity leave, may not take it, but they're entitled to 2 weeks of statutory paternity leave, so about £150 a week. If you're self-employed, there is no statutory provision, and it's the same if you're a self-employed man as it is for a self-employed woman. So there's an entire group of parents who don't get any help with being a parent, and it's purely down to their employment status. So talking to Olga was really, really interesting. I get, we talked to John Adams, who's a #1 sort of dad blogger, and I think if I was to, the one that stood out in terms of something that was a little bit different, but also was applicable for everyone, was we spoke to Will Champion, who's the drummer of Coldplay, and it was really interesting to talk about his role as a father and how generic his experience was in lockdown, and also his role within the band. So it was quite interesting to dive into how you maintain a relationship, a working relationship between friends for a long period of time, and how you go about that. And actually kind of work-life balance for them is scheduling tours, or historically was scheduling tours around the school holidays.
Wow.
And how they went about doing that. And a lot of them, they had kids at the same time. And so actually they very deliberately built Coldplay around work-life balance and what would work for the kids. So that was really interesting. We learned about adoption. Jamie Beaglehole from Daddy and Dad. So they adopted boys, a couple of boys from a family, and as a gay couple then, and some of the challenges of going, the hoops they went through, and and becoming sort of cheerleaders for the adoption process. So something slightly different. So yeah, I mean, there were 46 guests. So I would probably, if I had to make a list, I'd probably miss people out. But every single one had something different and interesting to say about fatherhood and and perhaps diversity and inclusion, the role of men within that in some form or other. So yeah, really interesting experience.
Yeah, and I saw that you also talked about job sharing, which I'm obviously very interested about. And so one of the things, based on your conversation with so many dads during that last period of time in the lockdown, was really now there is a lot of great resignation coming up, because people really spend that time to be able to think more, what do they want? So you've recently written a blog article which I loved, The Great Dad Reset. Could you share some more?
Yeah, so this was something that a friend of ours, one of the guests actually on Lockdown Dads, Hanson Lee, who's he's just gone full time in Daddy Life, which is a parenting platform for supporting dads, very research driven. Daddy Life are, and he asked me whether I could write sort of 300 words or so about dads and careers and that sort of thing, and I like the idea of this idea of a reset. It's language that's used probably in more negative terms, as in terms of perhaps sort of societal reset, or maybe the economy resetting and some kind of disruption. But I thought it was really appropriate, because I think it's that sense that dads our eyes have been opened to a different way of working and a different way of constructing their work and how they work and where they work. And actually it's becoming, I think there are still plenty of parts of society, and certainly government in the UK, who are promoting that everyone needs to be back at work, as if people haven't been working. But a lot of that kind of narrative, I think, is driven by the economy, city centre economy, and I get that and understand why it's important from a bigger picture. However, that sort of, it's very binary. I think that's what's quite interesting about sort of whether you call it the dad reset or whatever you call it, men and dads having their eyes opened, is that we need to move away from this binary notion that actually we're either always at work or always at home, and there's nothing in between. I mean, it's quite easy. You have a at home or at work camp. It's easy to divide and kind of create debate in that sense. But actually, a blended approach, something that takes into consideration what businesses want and what individuals want, and actually ask men, don't just assume that because they're a man, they don't have responsibilities that have built up over the last 18 months or so. Assuming that men will go back into the office because they're men, and we tell them to, is just it's a recipe for disaster if other businesses who you're competing with talent aren't doing that. And you'll see it with, certainly professional services and banking in London. You're seeing, people like Goldman Sachs. I think it's the chief executive of Goldman Sachs said that working from home was an aberration, which didn't say much for the exactly how hard his staff had presumably worked for 15 months under difficult circumstances. And I think some kind of blended approach is the answer, and that's what men are looking for, and that's what the surveys consistently say. And I think 40% of workers, I think McKinsey research suggests that 40% were considering moving jobs, or would strongly consider moving jobs if they didn't get the flexibility that they expected.
Yeah. Like that. Yeah, and it's so interesting that you are saying this, because you're also going to soon give a presentation, and I loved the title, Why Men's Work-Life Balance Matters for Everyone, because often this is more associated, in people's mind with women. So if you could, talk a little bit more about that.
It's kind of my keynote. It's kind of my keynote speech. I don't want to give away everything, Karin.
Okay, maybe some little tidbits.
Joking aside, no, I'm joking. So I first did this presentation about two years ago for a company in London called Actors Fund Management Company that my wife used to work at, and And that was the title. And then I wrote an article. There's quite long. If you go into my LinkedIn profile, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, it's quite easy to do. If you look under articles, there is an article. It's 4,000 words, which is why men's work-life balance matters to everyone. But it goes from the premise that actually that men struggle. They struggle with societal expectations. They struggle with response to Me Too movement in some cases. I had a really interesting conversation with a dad who had a 3-month-old daughter and hadn't been out on his own with her, partly because, to a certain extent, he wasn't comfortable being in an all-woman environment as a man, even though he was a dad first and foremost. And it was really shocking to me that was a barrier to him engaging with parenting. So that was quite an eye-opener for me. So you've got these sort of sense of fear, and then 80% of men become dads at some stage, and then things get ramped up and you're pulled in different directions. That desire to be a perfect partner, to provide for your family, to have time for yourself, and also to be connected with your children. And it's hard to do everything, and men feel that pressure. And actually, if you can support them to take the leave that they're entitled to work flexibly, ultimately, it's good for their work-life balance. It's good for their families, their family connection. It's good for performance at work, but also it starts a signpost to workplaces and to society more generally that it's not just about women do one thing and men do another. And this, I think, is the key thing about why men's work-life balance matters to everyone. Because actually, if you improve men's work-life balance, and you do that by encouraging them to work flexibly, work remotely, work in ways that have been traditionally associated with women in particular, and women with caring responsibilities, you start to say, actually, it's open to everyone. And if you've got two candidates going for a job, maybe they're both 30, one's a man, one's a woman, they've both just got married, they're exactly the same except one's a man and one's a woman. If you can't tell which one of those two candidates is likely to take extended leave and take extended leave because you've got great policies in place, or is going to want to work flexibly or remotely or whatever it might look like, if you can't tell, you can't then discriminate against the woman and assuming that she's not such a good bet because she's going to take 9 months off. So we're losing 9 months, we might lose another 9 months. And this kind of conversation, this sort of thought process goes through the mind of people who are in the hiring positions. But if actually you go, man and woman, we don't know, the man is going to take 6 months as well, and the woman's going to take 6 months. Actually, we're only going to judge them on capability and what they bring to the business, not on what their gender is. And I think that's why men's work-life balance matters to everyone, is because you get it right for men. Perversely, or perhaps perversely, I don't believe it's perverse, but unusually perhaps is the right way. Unusually, you unlock benefits in terms of equality in the workplace and also equality at home, because those men who are trading time in the commute, time in the office to time at home, if they're great dads, then they're using that time to be great husbands, great partners. They're in the home, they're doing things in the home, and that frees up time, energy, headspace for their partners. And in a lot of relationships, dual income relationships, you both need headspace to pursue your work and your work priorities, and to get ahead. And actually, if the woman is the one putting in a second shift, a shift at work and then a shift at home, then that's bound to be problematic for equality in the relationship and equality sort of more broadly, sort of in the workplace and society. So that's why men's work-life balance matters. It's a route into bigger, more interesting solutions, I think.
Thank you very much for giving away some of the tidbits. That's, I really believe very strongly in this. And, having read and seen organizations where maybe one of the senior leaders either steps down because of care work, or parents out loudly by saying, I am leaving today because my kid's baseball game or something like this trickles down much more and makes then also junior members of the company comfortable to do that. And so one of the things I would like to, talk a little bit more is that often people still see care work or, parental leave as a time where it's sort of quote unquote a career gap, or where nothing, no learning is being done.
Yeah.
And obviously, we know this couldn't be, further away from the truth, because there are so many transferable skills that can be learned. But I'd love, from your experience and also talking to other dads, what would be maybe 3 things you feel that get mentioned as, like, transferable skills from care work?
Yeah, I think the number one is managing your emotions. I think I think you my experience of my wife's a lawyer, and talking to my wife and lots of women that I know, I think the workplace, in a male dominated workplace, male behaviors which could involve shouting and being aggressive and being very perhaps intimidating within the workplace. I've seen it in my own work, consultancy work and all the rest of it. Those kind of stereotypical male behaviors may work for a short time within a workplace, that culture of sort of fear and perhaps quite direct and confrontational sort of behaviors. But you cannot use that with children. It's that sense of being able to manage yourself, especially with young children. I mean, I guess with any age, to be honest, because they'll find there's different challenges at different ages. I think, in my experience, and something I had to learn really, really carefully about taking a breath, taking yourself outside of the room. If you've got a crying baby, that ability to kind of go, okay, I'm going to take a step out. I'm going to take a step away from this situation. I can compose myself, and then I'm going to come back to it and be calmer and take the time that you need to take. I think that's a skill that for men is something that you could easily underestimate how important that is, to be measured and controlled, because the alternative of being not measured and controlled is slapping your child. That's if you really can't control your emotions. So learning that skill, I think, is a really, really important one. I think the one around time management ultimately is more about, I guess it's not time management per se, it's more about focus. I think when you're looking after children of whatever age, until they become quite relatively independent, maybe 5, 6, where they can be left to do things, you've only got a finite amount of time to do what you need to do, because there are, your children take up time, and there's time spent sitting with them, playing with them, that sort of thing. It's easier. Mine are 11 and 8 now, so they're downstairs, they're making their own fruit, they've got some homework to do. It's relatively straightforward. But until you got to that stage, you've got to nail. If you've got 5 things to do and you've got a half-hour window, you better get those 5 things done, because there is no kind of it can't be done at another time. You just won't get them done. So I think it's really good for focus and motivation. I think that comes into, you see it a lot traditionally with women returning to work, where and actually, to be fair, anyone who's got a hard deadline at the end of the day, right, I need to be out the door at 5 o'clock to do a nursery pickup, doesn't half concentrate the mind about what you do between 4 and 5 in the afternoon. Someone whose hard deadline, I was this man in my 20s, my hard deadline was 7 o'clock in the pub. I could waste between 5 and 7 because I didn't actually have that much left to do that I needed to do. My it's a different environment, so it breeds, I think looking after children breeds a sense of focus as well. And a third one, I've got calmness. I don't know what a good third one. I think those two are, can I just leave it at 2? I think those two.
Oh, sure.
Managing your emotions. I haven't got one that springs to mind at the moment, but I think managing your emotions and being focused are probably the two big ones. But I think, I suppose the third one, for men in particular, is to, and this one I know from experience when I was a new dad, I was 33, I don't know, is that young? When I first started, I was quite comfortable putting myself in an environment which was female dominated. So I was quite happy being the only dad at swimming, or the only dad at monkey music, or whatever activity it might be. I was very comfortable with that. But there was a dad's group that I used to go to, where there were a lot of men whose only interaction with adults during the day was when they went to the dad's group, and they went twice a week. They went on a Monday and a Thursday, whatever the days were. But they wouldn't go, and then everything else they were doing solo. They wouldn't go and interact with women as kind of equals, as parenting equals. And I find that quite sad in some ways. But I think taking extended leave and solo looking after your children, it arms you with the skills to be able to do it. So if the worst comes to the worst, if you have a relationship breakdown, if you've never looked after your children, and the judge, this is a bit of an extreme example, but if the judge, if there's no evidence that you've ever looked after your children, then the custody of your children isn't unlikely to lie with you in a ratio that maybe you'd want. I think that's an extreme example, but if you get comfortable looking after your children, you get comfortable being in female environments which you may not have been in before. I think it builds your interpersonal skills, and it's all very well having great relationships with men who believe the same thing as you, but actually you'll grow a lot more as a person if you put yourself in an environment that perhaps you aren't necessarily comfortable in. If that's monkey music and sitting there and doing, where is monkey hiding? And doing that and singing along with 8 mums, then I think you'll grow as a person as well, and you'll have a richer and rounder life experience to draw on.
Thank you so much, Ian. That's, it's so interesting to hear this. I've talked to dads who were, as you described, the only dad in an environment like, mommy and me group. And it was already named often mommy and me. So sadly, it's already the title feels exclusive, or not inclusive enough. And so I think if we look at, say, Scandinavia, where it's more and more common to have more dads who are taking longer paternity leave, I think that's where I'd love to see many more countries get to, so that it becomes more normal. But I mean, I so see it's like also the, things that people don't anticipate they would ever do. If you ask somebody in their, 20s and say, could you ever imagine singing along, some music with other, parents, right? I mean, you don't, I think that's often, it's sort of, you can't really imagine what you will do when you have a child, and it's no longer just a focus on you and your own life, but at another human being.
Yeah. There's a brilliant little financial acronym which I think I wrote a blog post about it called this sitcom is no laughing matter. And it's this idea you go from a dinky, so dual income, no kids yet. I mean, is dinky, and goes to sitcom, which is single income and something about an oppressive mortgage. I think it is. So single income and 2 children, oppressive mortgage, and it's that sense that actually things do change, and that's a lot of what I do with Inspiring Dads is about helping men to understand and navigate through that big change, because that time you first become a dad, you're really under pressure. You're putting under pressure yourself. A lot of the time it's yourself. A lot of it is about expectations around what being a great dad is and what your role is, and it can be difficult to navigate that, and you can be taking a lot of anxiety and a lot of internal pressures, because you want to be strong, you want to be the rock for your partner, and I think it does become difficult. But I think the Scandinavian model, as you said, Karin, is really interesting, because I think the model is kind of something approaching sort of equal leave for mums and dads, and it's ring fence for dads, and dads tend to send the more exciting first year, so from 6 months to a year, and I believe they're known as latte dads. That's the kind of idea. Yeah. It's lots of men going to coffee shops because they're all taking the 6 to 1 year, 6 months, and so probably if you go to a baby group that's got 9-month-old, then probably men outnumber women in those groups, I suspect. I don't know for certain, but I reckon that might be the case, because they're all doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I talked to Tristan Champion, who is a French citizen, but his wife is Norwegian, and so he got to experience what paternity leave is like in Norway. And it's what you just described. The kid was around, I think, 4 or 5 months old when he started the paternity leave. And yeah. And I mean, he, like, what was amazing, he was so inspired. He wrote a book about it, and with other dad advocates actually lobbied the French government to increase paternity leave from 2 to 4 weeks. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So
I'll have to check that. I'll check that with you later.
Yes. And now, so Ian, as we are, coming to a close of our conversation, I'd love to kind of get your perspective going forward. Where do you see, like, in the next maybe year or 5 years, how, and maybe post-pandemic, whenever that might be, how do you sort of see what's going to happen? Flexible work, more involvement with that. What's, your thoughts?
It's a hard one, because I think to a certain extent you're on a little bit of a threshold. I think it's falling in what we would consider to be the right direction, which is a broad understanding that everyone who'd worked in an office, and we have to be quite careful. I think we have to be quite careful, is that we are ultimately talking about jobs that can be done from home, can be done flexibly, and it is by necessity it's a 2-tier system, 3-tier system. If you work in a supermarket, if you're a doctor, if you're a nurse, any kind of frontline service, in some way we don't have that flexibility. But if you're office based, I think it will become. I think the businesses that take the time and care to understand how to support the new version of how people want to work will be the ones who get the best staff. And I think in time, the likes of Goldman Sachs, who are reluctant to go that way, or in fact are vehemently against that, will in some form have to fall into place, because their competitors will one by one be chipped away as the best talent. And it won't be for everyone. It will be a generation shift as well. I think you're seeing younger men are much more interested, younger people generally are much more interested in flexible working. It's easy to assume that all young people want to be in the office because they don't like working from home. I think it's much more nuanced than that. But I think over time you will see much more, much closer to a kind of maybe a 3 days in the office week, and we use that for collaboration. And maybe the top and start and end of the week are days where you can do other things, and you don't commute as much, you don't waste as much time, you're more closely connected with your kids. But I think the pandemic has humanized the challenge, that humanized the activity, and opened men's minds in particular to just how much care that goes into in family life, and how much stuff needs to be done, and who exactly historically has done that. And I think for a majority of men, and they're ready to step up and be more involved, and they're probably ready to advocate for it and seize it when it's put in front of them.
Thank you very much for your insights and thoughts, and it was such a nice conversation. And I hope to talk with you maybe in another year and see what is happening, and and hopefully you don't have to extend your Lockdown Dad podcast further.
For the moment, it's paused. We wrapped it up. Yeah, we wrapped it up. Last one was on Freedom Day, so hopefully we won't have to go back.
Fingers crossed, right? Yeah, and definitely. So for people who would like to contact Ian and find out more about where his blog, his website, what I have put together is a slide that you can find all of your contact information. So I will put that in now as we are saying goodbye. And thank you so much again, Ian, for being on the show.
No problem at all, Karin. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. We hope you gained valuable insights and new ideas. To keep listening to future episodes, please head over to iTunes or your favorite player and subscribe and give it a rating. We would very much appreciate a review and for you to share it on social media, so more people can start innovating in how they offer employment. Until the next time, goodbye!